Hello, family. We are so excited that you all have joined us once again for another Thurman Thursday. You all have been rocking with us so hard this semester, and we're so excited. All of the chapel assistants, our dean, our associate campus minister, we're so excited every week to see you come on and engage with us. And today is no different wherever you are. Thank you for tuning in. I'm actually not in my normal place. It's vacation time for me, but I had to make sure that I came on tonight because we have an amazing treat for you. And so, our friend Joseph Walker is going to give us a meditation, and then I will introduce our presenter, and then we'll jump straight into it. Take it away, Mr. Walker.
All right, good evening, everyone. My name is Joseph Walker, and I am a sophomore biology major from Valdosta, Georgia. And I proudly serve as the chapel's outreach and evangelism chair. It is a tradition of ours to start off every Thurman Thursday with a meditation from Howard Thurman. So today's meditation is entitled Life Goes On, and it reads During these turbulent times, we must remind ourselves repeatedly that life goes on. These we are apt to forget. The wisdom of life transcends our wisdom. The purpose of life outlasts our purposes. The process of life cushions our processes. The mass attack of disillusion and despair, distilled out of the collapse of hope, has so invaded our thoughts that what we know to be true and valid seems unreal and ephemeral. There seems to be little energy left for aught but futility. This is the great deception. By it, whole peoples have gone down to oblivion without the will to affirm the great and permanent strength of the clean and the commonplace. Let us not be deceived. It is just as important as ever to attend to the little graces by which the dignity of our lives is maintained and sustained. Birds still sing, the stars connive to cast their gentle gleam over the desolation of the battlefields, and the heart is still inspired by the kind world and the gracious deed. There is no need to fear evil. There is every need to understand what it does, how it operates in the world, what it draws upon to sustain itself. We must not shrink from the knowledge of the evilness of evil. Over and over, we must know that the real target of evil is not destruction of the body, the reduction to rubble the cities. The real target of evil is to corrupt the spirit of man and to give his soul the contagion of inner disintegration. When this happens, there is nothing left. The very citadel of man is captured and laid waste. Therefore, the evil in the world around us must not be allowed to move from without to within. This would be to overcome by evil, to drink in the beauty that is within reach, to clothe one's life with simple deeds of kindness, to keep alive a sensitiveness to the movement of the Spirit of God and the quietness of the human heart and the workings of the human mind. This has always the ultimate answer to the great deception. So may Thurman's word remind us of the precious value of life, help us celebrate it and protect our souls from the contagion of the inner disintegration during these turbulent times. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Walker, for that powerful meditation. And so, right now, I have the esteemed honor and privilege to present to all of our viewers and our chapel assistants in Morehouse and outside of Morehouse, all of our friends connected to us, an amazing scholar. Dr. Tama Bryant Davis is a licensed psychologist, professor of psychology at Pepperdine University, and director of Culture and Trauma Research Lab. She is the past psychology representative to the United Nations and a past president of the Society for Psychology of Women. Dr. Bryant Davis has published and presented on the societal trauma of racism and anti racism therapy. She also is the author of the book Thriving in the Wake of Trauma, a multicultural guide and co editor of the book Womanist and Mujerista Psychologies. The California Psychological Association honored Dr. Bryant Davis as Distinguished Scholar of the Year, and the Institute of Violence, Abuse, and Trauma honored her accomplishments as a mentor in trauma psychology. Dr. Tama has presented on trauma recovery internationally and nationally, as well as on CBS, Headline News, NPR, BET, and OWN TV, among other networks. She is also an ordained elder in the greatest church, the African Methodist Episcopal Church, and a minister to mental health at First AME in Los Angeles, California. Ladies and gentlemen, we are in for a treat. And I know a lot of you have already shared her post that she makes on Twitter and all the social media sites. But Dr. Tama is here to free us tonight. And so I'm going to turn the presentation over to her.
Oh, thank you so much, Mr. Cloud. I am so appreciative of that introduction and to see your leadership as another AME. And thank you so much for that meditation, for our technology support on today, for all of you who have gathered in this place. I am truly honored to be in the house. I am truly honored to be a part of this series, particularly named for Howard Thurman. And so I will begin to share my slides as we start looking at spirituality and psychology. So it is important that I start with identifying myself so that you have an inner understanding of the framework from which I speak. And so what people often see from the outside is psychologist and minister, but you should know I come with backup. So I come from a legacy of ministers, of healers from the African Methodist Episcopal Church, which is founded in an anti-racist doctrine and theology that is focused on liberation and empowerment, particularly for Black peoples in Africa and the African diaspora. And so I am the daughter of an intercessor, my queen mother, Akosua. I am the daughter also of a retired bishop and great mentor and leader, bringing Pentecostalism to the AME Church. And I am the sister of one of your alum, minister, reverend, pastor, my big brother, Jamal Harrison Bryant, who has ministered for you all several times. And so I am grateful for that legacy and foundation as I come to share with you the realities of the intersection of our spirituality and our theology, that being people of African descent, we recognize it is a false dichotomy between spiritual and secular, but we understand that we need to show up in a holistic way, recognizing mind, body, heart, spirit all intersect, they matter, and they influence each other. So it is a mutually reciprocal, mutual agreement between our mind and our spirit, our hearts and our spirits. And so when we sing, "It is well with my soul," it is important that we then really raise the question, is it well with my mind? Is it well with my heart? Is it well in my body? Is it well with my spirit? And when it is not well, can we tell the truth? Do we have to censor? Do we have to just say, I'm blessed and highly favored? Or can I say that, in fact, I am blessed and dealing with depression, that I am anointed and have anxiety? Can I be saved and also have stress in my life? And the answer is yes. And so for us to be holistic people who are committed to liberation means that we will begin to tell the truth about the conditions we are in individually and collectively. I am mindful that this presentation is not being shared divorced from our contemporary reality of 2020 and where we find ourselves facing multiple traumas. In fact, coronavirus, COVID-19, is a global pandemic. It is a medical trauma that disproportionately affects Black people. And in addition to that, we have the trauma of racism, recognizing the trauma of racism as being both historical and contemporary, that we are both the primary targets and we are also affected by it vicariously by what we witness. We are also aware that racism is an intergenerational trauma, and so it has been passed down. The impact of it has showed up in our parenting, has showed up in the warnings and the messages in our socialization. And so, in fact, we recognize from neurological research that trauma affects the brain. The good news is, and we know every preacher needs to have some good news, is the good news is there is neuroplasticity, which means the brain can change. And because the brain can change, just like trauma affects the brain, healing affects the brain. And so we are being affected physiologically and spiritually and emotionally by these times that we are living in. And likewise, when we create spaces for restoration, for healing, for recovery, for liberation, that also can shift, transform, and allow our very minds to be renewed. And so these are difficult times, but we also are people of radical hope. And so being able to hold both realities is both a psychological and a spiritual decision. So I want to start by saying welcome. Welcome into this space that Morehouse Chapel has created for us to be honest. Welcome in this place where our tears are welcome, where we do not have to hide behind the Harlem Renaissance poem. We wear the mask that grins and lies. It hides our teeth and shades our eyes. So many times we are told that we have to be twice as good, that we have to always be ready, that we can never show vulnerability or weakness. But we recognize that suppressing is not the same as healing, that hiding is not the same as healing. And so welcome into this place that rightly so has been named after the great theologian Howard Thurman, where truth can be spoken so that we can truly experience healing. Audre Lorde taught us that our silence will not save us, and the word tells us that the truth will set us free. Howard Thurman wrote that there is something in every one of you that waits and listens for the sound of the genuine in yourself. This is a call home. We who have been wandering, caught up in other people's opinions, tangled in dangerous and destructive theologies, baptized into toxic church cultures or superficial theologies, transformed but waiting for authentic change, the kind that lasts longer than the benediction, the kind of change that will greet us on Wednesday morning or Friday night, the kind that lasts longer than it takes to pull out of a church parking lot. We are looking for authentic healing, change, and liberation. Superficial healing will not do. And so for Black people in particular, and the church as a whole, there is an urgency for us to come home to truth, to come home to authenticity, to come home to transparency, to come home to ourselves, to come home to God. This is a part of the reason we got rid of the testimony service in many of our churches, because we believe that people could not handle our truth, because we have raised up generations that had to operate in secrecy and silence, which perpetuated hypocrisy. But we are here on today to create sanctuary, to say the truth of how you're doing for real is welcome here. The reality is that many of us who are watching turned around 3 times and high-fived our neighbor and even put in a significant offering and still have some grief that has been unresolved. That many of us served on usher boards and sang in choirs and may even be in ministry, but have had to hide depression. And so I want you to know in this space, all of you is welcome. There is no need to perform at the mourner's bench. No need to hide your burdens at this altar. There is room for the depressed and the anointed. There's room for the anxious and the sanctified. There is plenty good room. And so in this space, we can note that we have been affected and even infected. We can note that there are times when we have not been able to sleep at night, when we have lost our appetite or could not stop eating. In this space, we can tell the truth about struggles with addiction within ourselves or within our family. Within this space, we can even name bipolar disorder and schizophrenia. Within this place, we do not have to pretend that we know nothing about eating disorders or suicidal thoughts. In this space, we can speak truth because this is actual sanctuary. And so we want to broaden our ideas of what it means to be in sacred space, because it is not truly a sacred space if parts of us are not welcome, if parts of us are marginalized, are oppressed, even in this thing we call sanctuary. And so one of the groups that are marginalized, even within our community, are those who are living with mental illness. And it is unacceptable, as God calls for us to come unto me, all ye that are heavy laden, and I'll give you rest. Come unto me, all ye that are heavy laden, and I'll give you rest. I love you more than you love yourself. I know you more than you know yourself. You can run, but you can't hide. You can run, but you can't hide. I won't give up on you. I am your very breath. I won't give up on you. I am your very breath. So come unto me, all ye that are heavy laden, and I'll give you rest. I will give you rest. I will give you rest. You are welcome here. So we turn our attention to our spirituality, and in particular, our theology. Who is this God that we worship? Who is this God that we have co-constructed or taught our children? Who is this God that we were taught for ourselves? And so this God, our God, is not divorced from our pain, from our tribulation, from our sorrow, from our tears. God is very familiar with our pain, with our despair, with our challenges, with our stress. So we recognize from Black liberation theology and from womanist theology that God is on the side of the oppressed, that God comes in order to resurrect, that God comes in order to empower, to shift the power dynamic. And so when we recognize what anti-racism is, what anti-sexism is, what it means to be anti-oppression, it means that I stand against the current order of things so there can be justice and equity and liberation, that I recognize that there is more to us than how we have been treated or defined. And so it is not by accident that we would gather in this place on the same day that a president would call one of our queens a monster. It is not an accident that we would gather in this space and recognize that not only is there a God who chooses us and who loves us, but who is actually there with us in our experience, crafting and combining and shifting and remaking and ordering our steps, even in the midst of it all. And so we are called on today, in order to speak truth about who God is, we have to also tell the truth about who we are, because it is a relationship. And so a large part of how I understand the I am is what I have needed the I am to be to me, what I have seen the I am be when that great one shows up in history, in my family, in my midnight hour. This is how I come to understand my theology. And so it is important that we decolonize theology and decolonize psychology. What does that mean? A colonial theology is one that either decontextualizes, does not recognize where we are and who we are, or it blames us for our condition. That is a colonial theology that shames and blames and operates in guilt and fear, and there is no love there. But we recognize that God is love. And so that if there is no love flowing in the direction of African and diasporic people, then the thing someone is talking about is indeed a thing, but it is not God. And so we also recognize in psychology the importance of understanding the ways in which our mental health has been affected by our condition. That when we are struggling with depression, anxiety, PTSD, addiction, those things did not emerge out of a black hole. Those things emerged out of our tribulation, our historical realities of oppression, and our contemporary dynamics where that continues to show up. But we gather in this place knowing that not only do Black lives matter, but Black mental health matters. And because Black mental health matters, I recognize that I can tell the truth about how I really feel. And I recognize that that is indeed biblical. So this false theology that has been promoted is one of psychological prosperity gospel. And in psychological prosperity gospel, there is the myth that if I love God, I will always be happy. There is a myth that if I love God and if I worship God and if I am saved and if I am baptized, then I will never have any fear, that I will never have any doubt, that I will never have insecurity. And those things are lies and unbiblical. So when we study the Bible, the Old Testament and the New Testament, we see great prophets weeping. When we study the Old Testament and the New Testament, we see Jesus even in the Garden of Gethsemane, despairing, crying and begging God for another option. And how many of us, even in 2020, have been crying and begging God for another option? Another option besides COVID-19, another option beyond all of the racial terror, another option beyond the particular circumstances of our lives. And that is not to be unchristlike. To be Christ-like is to be able to tell God my truth. It is to be able to shed tears. To be Christ-like is to even acknowledge that I'm tired. And so we notice that Jesus would often go away by himself to pray, to rest, to reflect. But yet we shame people in churches and in sanctuaries and tell them to be Christ-like is to always be busy. To be Christ-like is always to sacrifice yourself. Well, there were times that Jesus sacrificed himself, but there were also times when there were still sick people in town and he would disappear and go lay down somewhere. There were times when they were facing a storm and he was in the ship asleep, because Jesus was modeling for us that our rest and restoration matters, that stillness matters. Jesus was teaching us to not get a case of the big head and believe that we have to carry everything and everyone on our shoulders. We have God for that. And so, yes, we do our part, but we also, while we are keenly reminded of our divinity, we also
It seems like Dr. Tama has had some technological issues, but she will be back with us momentarily. We're doing all we can to get her back in the stream. Let's see what we can do. Please remain with us. Let's see. Okay. Thank you for calling First Look Appraisal. And we hear again from what Dr. Tama was talking about, bringing the full self to these spaces that we're in. The reason that we invited her is because she is a leader, not only in thought, but in practice with these issues. I think she may be coming back in. Let's see. Okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to cut out really quick, and then we'll come back. We'll go live again with Dr. Tama back in this space. So please bear with us for just a moment. There we go.
Yeah. So let's see. Shall I continue?
Yes, please,
All
please,
right.
please.
Wonderful. We are unmoved.
Yes, yes. And the grace is all the grace in all of this is that this is a new process for all of us. We've been in this for 9 months, but we still don't get this thing right. And
That's
so
all right.
we're gonna keep
That's
going
all
and
right.
make it happen. Please continue.
The life of Black people in America. We are not easily discouraged.
Oh, not at all. Not at all. We keep it moving, keep it pushing.
All right. Excellent.
So our tech team is asking you to reshare your presentation.
Okay. Let me come back. All right. You see it?
There we go.
All right. Excellent. So we want to think about, is this holy ground? What are the ways in which we can really embody and magnify the intersection of mental health and spirituality within our faith communities? What are the ways that we can really destigmatize mental health and mental illness within our faith communities? And one of those approaches really requires faith leaders to get healing themselves. A big problem that we have is if those who are in ministry are overwhelmed, and I know especially in these times, are under a lot of stress from COVID, from financial stress, spiritual stress, and so many people pulling on you emotionally. But if the shepherd is not willing to acknowledge the need for mental health care themselves, then often they will promote within the congregation a stigma that says all you need to do is pray. And often those who are shaming people about going to therapy are the very ones who would benefit from some therapy. And so we want to really begin at the top, if we are to talk about it in a hierarchical sense, to start with leadership destigmatizing mental health and no longer making comments in sermons that are uninformed, that are blaming and shaming, and that are stigmatizing, but instead promoting messages that really talk about the importance of mental health. The important thing to remember about this is that it's biblical. So if we wanted to begin preaching about mental health, all we would have to do is start preaching more narrative sermons, because in the story is the depression, in the story is the PTSD, in the story is the anxiety, in the story is the conflict in relationships, in marriage, between parents and children. And so to preach mental health only requires that you preach the gospel. So some people get concerned that you're asking people to do too much or be something else. All we are saying is tell the story, tell the fullness of the story of what people are feeling in these circumstances and what they are thinking and what they are experiencing and the impact it has on whole communities. When we talk about the enslavement of the Israelites, when we talk about wandering in a wilderness for 40 years, for us to really take in the fullness of the story of what it means to feel like God does not hear your prayers. This is in the book. So all we have to do is look at the Psalms and look at Job and begin to tell the story about our despair, about our insecurities. Only look at Moses and look at Mary. And so we can begin to create space for the sanctuary to really be a sanctuary, for a church to actually be a church, for sacred ground and safe space to actually be sacred and safe. It also would mean utilizing our resources that are actually in our faith communities. In our faith communities are social workers and therapists and psychologists. And so when we begin to let them speak during health fairs and having a health moment within the service and collaborating with mental health professionals and organizations, and every pastor should have a referral list of mental health professionals in the area. So there is one thing to provide pastoral counseling. It is another thing to be willing to refer, so that while I am providing the pastoral care, that some people would benefit from additional services, and for us not to talk people out of their healing, but we want our people to be well by all means necessary. And so there is not a dichotomy or a choice between prayer and therapy. But you can pray before you go to therapy. You can pray while you're at therapy. You can pray when you leave. And so we are not saying that prayer doesn't work or that the sermon wasn't sufficient. We are saying that we are a collective. And so we feed the spirit, but we also want to heal and nourish and support the mind, the heart, and the relationships that are suffering with our silence. We want to really be mindful about the truth that we discover in the stories. I remember I was presenting at a sexual assault conference in San Diego, and a woman who was a clinician raised her hand and she said, I've been having trouble providing clarity for one of my clients because she's a survivor and she's lost her faith. And she said, and to be honest, I lost my faith a while ago too, so I don't know how to guide her. And I said to her, I believe that doubt is actually a step towards spiritual maturity. And often we don't talk about this. We like to sing that song, I woke up this morning and I didn't have no doubt. Well, there are some things we believe because we read it. We believe because our pastor told us. We believe because our mother or father said it. And then life shows up and you have to wrestle with it to really come to an understanding of what do I really believe. And that wrestling is our spiritual growth and maturity, so that what emerges out of that has some roots to it. And so when I shared that with the person who asked the question, she said, that's so interesting because maybe that's why Thomas has always been my favorite disciple. And I was shocked when she said it, because no one ever says Thomas is their favorite disciple. He is held up as the bad example. He is ridiculed for being doubting Thomas. But this sister who asked the question, she said, the thing I liked about Thomas was he wasn't sure, but he kept showing up. And I just believe on today, there has to be room in the sanctuary for people who have questions for God, questions about why, questions about the conditions of their own life, but yet they keep showing up. They keep wrestling with it. They keep trying to find God in it, trying to find themselves in it. And when we create space where people can show up with their doubts and their questions, then we will have real sanctuary. Then it will actually be holy ground and not silenced ground. And so many of us are dealing with trauma right now. And if you're in ministry, you want to be mindful of the symptoms and the signs that may show up for people, that there are those who are showing up with depression, but not only traditional depression, which looks a lot like a deep sadness, which lasts at least 2 weeks, but there's also irritable depression. So people who are showing up with an attitude. And we recognize that often that is the stereotype, particularly of Black women having an attitude. I wonder what it would look like if we could see the despair, if we had not been conditioned to hide our sadness, and instead it shows up with anger, with irritability, Even among our men and our young people, it shows up. And so the depression is there. People are anxious, insomnia. Many people are having panic attacks. And so we begin to give room for the reality of our wounds, because we know that our wounds cannot heal when we are unwilling to see them or to name them. And so in our sacred space, even those of us who are worshiping online, we can begin to speak truth, not only truth to power about racism, but truth to power about our mental health and the ways in which racism, COVID, and a lifetime of stressful events have had an impact on us. And not only a lifetime, but one of the things we begin talking about is ancestral wounds, what it is that we are carrying. Some have called post-traumatic slave syndrome, right? And so when we create space for the realities of that and recognize that, to be honest, it will not all be fixed at the point of the benediction, but we continue to show up for each other week after week, recognizing that people are not required to pretend for us, to perform, to be happy, but instead in the sanctuary, this place is for you, even when you are not feeling joyful. When I was going through seminary, one of the professors said, every church now has a praise team, but what we need is a lamentation team. And I wonder, in the sanctuary where you attend, is there room for those who are grieving? Is there room for those who are outraged about the outrageousness of racism and oppression? Is there room for those who have a bad attitude? Is there room in your sanctuary, or only for those who are ready to run a lap around the church? So we want to recognize again that our Black lives matter and Black mental health matters, but we also want to honor what we have done and who we have been. So while there is work for us to do around health fairs and referrals and preaching sermons and incorporating in our prayers and in our liturgy, in our public worship, for us to name mental illness. What would it mean for so many people if when you prayed on Sunday, you prayed for those with depression? If when you prayed on Sunday, if you prayed for those who have had miscarriage? If when you prayed on Sunday, if you prayed for those who are anxious because they don't know how they're going to pay their tuition? I wonder what it would look like if on Sunday you prayed for those who have thought about suicide or maybe thinking about it right now. And so there is work that we can do, as we also want to honor the work that we have done, that our church has really done in incredible ways, provided balm, healing balm for those who are wounded, that have preached to us about our identity, our value, and our worth, preached to us about the very love of God that is present for us, that there has been healing in our singing, there has been healing in praise dancing, there has even been healing and redemption for those who are mistreated all week long and come on Sunday morning to be the head of the usher board. We want to recognize what that means for people, what it has meant for our church as a collective, as a community, for the saving not only of souls, but the healing of hearts and minds. We recognize that when some people are shouting, they're not shouting out of joy. Some people are shouting out their despair, shouting through their frustration. That when some people are laying prostrate in the sanctuary, it is not just a place of peace, but some people are laying there looking for peace. That when people kneel awaiting communion, that some people are not just there with gratitude, but also with grief. And so we have served an important role that was highlighted for me when I was in conversation with Minister Vicki Lee, who is the first Asian American minister ordained in the African Methodist Episcopal Church. And Minister Vicki Lee shared with me, she said, I have been to both white churches and Black churches. She said, and I feel like the function of both of them is polar opposite. She said, what I observed in the white church is that people come in very lofty, and the point of the service is meant to humble themselves so that by the end, they have emptied themselves and recognized how much they need God to be God. And she said in her observation at Black churches that people come in often weary, often stressed, often frustrated, and the liturgy is designed to heal, to restore, to empower, to uplift, so that by the end, people are on their feet, clapping and waving their hands and believing that they are more than conquerors. And so it does matter who we are when we enter a space. And so when those of us who are crafting the worship experience are oblivious to the mental health issues that people are facing, we can miss it. We can miss our assignment of what we do in that sacred space and what we do after it. But we have a strong foundation we can build on in terms of the role that we have played from the beginning of sacred space being also a meeting place for revolution, that our radical resistance came out of our spirituality. And one of the things that psychologists, liberation psychologists, Black psychologists, womanist psychologists recognize that our wellness will not just come from coping. When Dr. King, who your chapel is named for, came and spoke to the American Psychological Association, he challenged the American Psychological Association, do not help people to learn to adjust to dysfunction, but you have to empower people so that they will resist dysfunction. And that is a part of our calling. It is not only the comfort, it is not only the healing, but then for us to be empowered to fight, to know that justice is a mental health issue. Liberation is a mental health issue, that righteousness calls us to shift the tide and to dismantle oppression in all of its forms and to build up a place that is really the beloved community. And so we honor the ways in which we have done that, and we acknowledge the ways in which we have missed it. So I want to share in closing a word with you to let you know in this season, we are in the ark. We are in Noah's ark where it is dark and we often cannot see our way out. We don't know when we're going to get free of this pandemic. We are in the dark as it relates to what will happen with this election. And not only in the ark was it dark, but it also, we would say that it stinks in the ark. And many of us, this is not the year that we chose. It's not how we wanted things to be. It's not how we painted this season of our lives. And so we would say it stinks and it's dark. Many of us in the ark are also having to deal with loss, that those who were in the ark had to leave people behind, leave seasons of their lives behind, leave things they cared about behind, leave jobs that they wanted behind, leave security behind. And so we are in this season of grief and of loss, of darkness, and recognizing this situation stinks. And many of us have had to engage with people that we did not know well before, trying to find connection even in these difficult times. The big question that comes for us is often, why is it taking so long? But God is declaring to us on today, I am taking you somewhere. I have not forgotten about you, that I still have a purpose and plan for your life. I know there have been some false stops along the way where we thought this was going to be over in May, and we thought it would be over in August, and now they're saying it may be a whole nother year. But I want to tell you, be not weary in well-doing, for in due season, we'll be able to declare like our foreparents, the storm is passing over. The storm is passing over. The storm is passing over. Hallelujah. And so for many of us, the weeping has lasted more than a night. For many of us, it's lasted more than a month, more than a year. But with all of the seasons in your life, I want you to know that God's hands are still present, that God's eyes are still on us, and that the promises of God are still sure and guaranteed. And so I pray blessing over each of us as we listen on today, to know that in fact, God is up to something. And I pray that you outlast the midnight, that you outlast the storm, so that we can taste and see what God has in mind concerning us. God bless you.
Amen. Amen. I know
Amen.
our chat is blowing up right now. Thank you so much, Dr. Tama, for all of that. We see a comment from our former senior bishop, Bishop Bryant. I do want to recognize many persons in the AME Church who have commented and are here. And Bishop Frank Curtis Cummings stopped in a little bit during your presentation.
Oh, beautiful.
But there are questions that I have, and also some questions that came in the chat. And so we'll do that about 5 to 7 minutes, and then we'll transition out. Is that all right with you?
That sounds good.
Okay, cool. So our associate campus minister said, how do we create moments of Black joy amid looming trauma?
Yes. So, one of the incredible ways to create Black joy is through our art. And so, we see even in our protest march, when our people will break out in the electric slide, that's who we are. To while we see the realities of oppression, that with our creativity, in our music, in our dance, in our spoken word, that there is joy in those places, and recognizing, I'll say, especially for activists, to know that we want it to be sustainable. So we have been called to that pledge that the marathon continues. So this is not a short thing. This is not summer of 2020 and we're going to be done. So in order for us to endure to the end, I have to have some joy in my life. And so giving yourself permission to rest, to enjoy, to do the things that you love, to spend time with people where you don't have to explain yourself, to get in the presence of people who get you, then you'll have some joy.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Most definitely. And I think that's a beautiful point to bring out, because especially persons in my generation, we're always consistently and constantly seeking validation, whether it be on social media or in our friend groups. And to hear you, give that liberating statement to go around people who understand you, who you don't have to constantly explain yourself to. I think that's amazing. You said earlier that there was a difference in the services between the Black church and the Anglo-Saxon or white church. Could you speak more to that distinction, and what does it mean in a non-denominational era where you have churches with both cultures present?
Mm-hmm.
What does that mean?
Yes. So for those who are pastoring or would like to plant multicultural churches, it's important that we remember the difference between representation and tokenism.
Mm,
So with tokenism, I want to have different people present, but I'm not going to actually address different people's needs.
yeah,
I'm
yeah,
not going to actually have different people in leadership, right? And so it is not truly a multicultural church if I have multicultural members, but Jesus is white, the pastor is white,
yeah.
everybody who gets to make a decision is
It's
white,
white.
right? That's not a multicultural church.
Mm-mm.
So we have to be mindful of who is present, and then for us to preach and teach in such a way that addresses people's reality. And sometimes we want to talk about God without context. So that is really a colonial theology, right? To
Yeah.
pretend that reality doesn't exist, right? Just love your neighbor. Well, you want to talk about what does it mean to love when I'm in a hostile place?
Yeah.
What does it mean for me to show up in an environment where people perpetually underestimate me? And yet I'm called upon to be quote unquote loving, right? So we have to talk about the reality of people's lives for the church to be relevant.
Mm-hmm. I agree. Toward the beginning of selection of readings as well as presentation to us tonight. You talked about women, especially Black women, and the stigma about their expression. Last night we saw. Wait, was it last night? Yes, I think
Yes.
it was last night.
Yeah.
We saw Senator Kamala Harris and Vice President Pence debating, and her facial expressions and mannerisms showed something that maybe her speech did not. What
Yes.
does that mean for Black women to be expressive without being called angry or
Yes.
disrespectful or condescending? What does that look like?
Yes. It is a skill, and she demonstrated it well. So it is code, it is coding, and here it is really important. There has been psychological research that has done about when there are interracial conversations,
Mhm.
and you have the Black person and the white person evaluate how the exchange went. And the white person will often evaluate the exchange as having gone better than the Black person. And when they follow up to try to figure out why, they said that the white people were analyzing the conversation based on what was said, the content of what was said, and the
Mhm.
Black person was analyzing the body language and the
Right.
facial expressions,
Yeah.
right? And so we know that you can speak without saying a word. And so she was communicating to him, to herself, to God, and to us. And those who had eyes could see.
Yes. Yes. It was very clear. And moving in those spaces, as an expressive people, we constantly have to police ourselves in these spaces, not to come off a certain way, not to, not to. We can't bring our fullest self sometimes to these spaces. And what is the effect of that on the psyche in the church
Yes.
as well as in public spaces?
I'm so glad you named that, because what it is invisible labor, which we also call emotional labor,
Mhm.
right? That if you're a Black man working in corporate America, if you're constantly feeling like you have to smile so that people aren't intimidated, that when you're walking through the halls, you don't want them to be afraid, so you're constantly joking and laughing and smiling, that's on top of the work you have to do. So it is exhausting. And I'm also glad that you named that we not only do that in spaces where we are the only one or one of few, but one of the painful things is we have brought that masking behavior into the church, where we pull on people to perform. And one of the ways I talk about that in our community is people often saying to children, fix your face, right? You're not allowed to be sad. You're not
That's it.
allowed to be mad. You're like,
That's
you
it.
need
Snap those
to
feelings
smile
right
or look
together.
neutral, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so many of us have grew up with that message of let me fix my face. But the reality is, if if with my family I have to fake it, if at church I have to fake it, if at work I have to fake it, no wonder people are exhausted,
Yeah.
tired, depressed, and that's why also some people isolate, because if in order to be around you I have to perform, I'd rather be by myself because I'm tired.
Alone.
Yeah,
Alone.
yeah.
I would rather be alone. I think that's beautiful that you bring context to that, and I think this will be one of my final questions. I'm not going to name this person because their denomination precedes them, but the question is, what do we do when the spaces that are known for liberation become oppressive?
Yes, indeed. So this is important. There are multiple answers depending on who you are in that dynamic. I would say for people who have influence or who have the ear of the leadership, then they need to speak to them directly, right? Because I don't know a lot of people who have been transformed by strangers just saying things about them. That people who are able to take correction usually can take it from people who they know care about them. So that means you have a responsibility, if you have that relationship with that person or those people, to really address it. And then I would say for those who are members there, that God does not call you to have to apply long suffering to your church membership. And I say that as someone who, my grandmother would often say, I'm not a church hopper, right? Like whatever pastor comes, this is my church, and I'm just gonna
Uh-huh.
stay, right?
That's the AME way. That is
Right.
the AME
I'm gonna
way.
outlast them, right?
That's it.
So I think, but we want to be careful about staying in places where by our presence and by our support, we are supporting something that is toxic. And
Wow.
so I would encourage people to be prayerful, but to give themselves freedom to know no matter how long you have been there, you don't have to stay in those places, especially when God has very much
Left.
stepped out of those spaces, right? We don't feel the presence of God here. So
Mhm.
I need to go where I can be nourished, not just where I have obligation.
Right. Right. And again, I agree wholeheartedly. Sometimes we get stuck, being persons who have been in church all of our lives. You're constantly taught you stay here, you stick it out, you love your church. And sometimes, it's no longer nourishing you. And so
Yes.
you have to make the hard decision of, maybe it's time for me to move somewhere else. Maybe
Mm-hmm.
God is calling, for me to have an exodus here.
Yes.
That's a
Right.
tough place to be in, but I think it's necessary if we're going to continue to grow spiritually and theologically, and even psychologically.
Yes.
My last question to you
Mhm.
is, what 3 books are you reading and why?
I'm going to pick up stuff right here. Let's do it right here. So, one of them I want to hold up is Decolonizing Multicultural Counseling. If there's anybody who was watching, turn it that way, sorry. If there was anyone who was watching who is a mental health professional, then it's really important that you start to look at social justice oriented psychotherapy, social justice oriented psychotherapy. And then I want to show you Stay Woke, which is a book about meditation. It says for the rest of us, which is us, right? And I'm so glad you all started with meditation today. Let me tell you, when you hear people say that meditation is anti-Christian, that's just a lie, and that's some foolishness. So the Bible talks about us being still and silent. And right now we do a whole bunch of talking and our praying and not a lot of listening. And you waiting for a prophet to come to town for you to get a word from a prophet. God's like, I'll talk to you directly if you would ever be quiet, be still. So stay woke. And then I want to name, I don't have this one right next to me, but a dear sister, a friend of mine, psychologist, Black woman, Christian psychologist. Her name is Dr. Robin Gobin, and her book is The Self-Care Prescription. The Self-Care Prescription by Dr. Robin Gobin, and she is a Black Christian psychologist.
Okay, well, folks, you heard it here. Get those 3 books. Drop it in the chat. Let's send some positive energy to Dr. Tama for blessing us again tonight. Thank you so much for sharing and emptying your spirit to us tonight. We do not take it lightly, and we are honored that you accepted the invitation to come to our Thurman Thursday with the Morehouse College Chapel Assistance Program. Thank you so much, Dr. Tama.
Thank you so much for having me. I am deeply honored and so appreciative of you all's leadership.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. So a few announcements to those watching. We're off this Sunday because it's midterm. So we want everybody to be able to focus, hone in, and have your own spiritual time this Sunday. Study, study, study. But next Thurman Thursday is October 15th. The Black Vote with Reverend Stephen Alva Green, the social justice pastor at the Greater Allen Cathedral in Jamaica, New York. And then October 22nd is Homecoming Sunday with Pastor Eddie Anderson. As always, we send good energy, good love, and good vibes to you who are watching with us. Thank you so much for laboring with your hearts and with your minds with the Chapel Assistance Program this week. We love you all so much, and we'll see you next week for Thurman Thursday. You all be blessed. We'll see you.